Hi, welcome to the Colors of Failure podcast. I'm glad you're here with us today. I recently connected with Dr. Paul Losoff, a licensed clinical psychologist, to talk about his experiences, views, and approaches to failure. As a psychologist, Dr. Losoff has practiced for over 15 years and specializes in treating adults struggling with a wide range of issues, including depression, anxiety, self-esteem, ADHD, career stress and burnout, and relationship conflicts. Earning his doctorate from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology in 2013, he brings extensive experience to his practice, including crisis work in an emergency hospital department, teaching doctoral psychology students, and serving as training director for a local practice. In 2023, Dr. Losoff founded Bedrock Psychology Group, where he sees patients in person and offers telehealth therapy to individuals in most states. Before his psychology career, Dr. Losoff spent 15 years as a professional guitarist, earning a bachelor's degree in music performance from Columbia College. His diverse musical pursuits spanned rock bands, classical guitar performances, theater productions, studio recording, and teaching. Ultimately, a fascination with the science and art of therapy, coupled with disillusionment with the musician's lifestyle, led him to exchange his guitar for a therapist's chair. Currently, Dr. Losoff has rekindled his love of guitar and can be seen playing in his local dad band. I hope you enjoy my conversation on failure with Dr. Losoff. I'm really interested to hear your story, Paul, because there's a lot, as you're sharing it with me earlier, that resonates. And
I'm a big failure, so let's get into it.
There we go. Well, yeah. So, Paul, what I want to do, I do have questions, that I'll give you at the end, and just things that I'm trying to qualitatively maybe do a little research study here.
Sure.
But what I'd like you to do, start at the beginning, right? Start tell me your story, wherever you want to get started with it.
Well, sure. So outside Chicago in the suburbs, and pretty average, uneventful suburban lifestyle, privileged and safe. And then in high school, I fell in love with Jimmy Page or Led Zeppelin, and I was obsessed with them, and that's all I wanted to listen to, and I wanted nothing more than to emulate that, to play guitar.
Yeah.
It took me a couple of years. I mean, I was like, who am I thinking that I have anything special to even think I could come close to some of these, rock and roll gods as they call them. So it took me a while to get over that doubt and just start at the beginning. Was primarily self-taught. I mean, I had lessons and things, but primarily self-taught for, I don't know, let's say from 15 to 18, 19.
Okay.
And just kept doing it, even though I didn't really have the confidence. I just, it was mostly fun. And then, meanwhile, I went to University of Wisconsin in Madison. Totally unprepared for that, and so I had no sort of sense of direction there. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Well, actually, I wanted to play guitar, but I was like, this is not realistic. It wasn't feasible.
Sure.
And luckily, I had great supporting parents that let me pursue it. So ultimately, I failed out of University of Wisconsin in Madison after a year or two. And then went to Columbia College in Chicago, and found myself in the music performance bachelor's program.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I met one of probably the best things that happened to me during that period was I started playing classical guitar. My teacher, Norm Ruiz, ultimately became my mentor, and I think that propelled my skills, my finger strength, and really propelled me into more professional caliber. I mean, I'm still learning and but ultimately I kept going, and after a while you kind of have little successes here and there that kind of are breadcrumbs to keep you wanting to to practice more and to
Sure.
and to do that. Yeah, I'm fast forwarding. In my early 20s or mid 20s, I just did a lot of random stuff. I played Well, I played classical guitar and I also played electric guitar. Classical guitar was more for like weddings, restaurants. I played in sometimes like corporate events, things like that. I was basically just musical wallpaper there. It was fun, but it got old. Played in some theater gigs as the backing part of the backing band. I did some recordings, and then I had my own a couple bands I was in, and one I formed, and that was fun. And then sort of just fell apart. And so I'm condensing a lot, but ultimately, like, I got tired of the musician's lifestyle. Like I felt like I had achieved a certain talent that I really never had thought I could do, and so I kind of overcame that. But yet, the career aspect was just too much to cope with, and I didn't. This was pre-Obamacare, so you kind of had to work to get insurance, and so having a full-time job and trying to be a musician, it was an unhealthy lifestyle, and ultimately in my early mid-30s, I was like, it wasn't fun anymore. I just didn't have it in me, and I tell people I retired or divorced from my guitar side, and it was difficult at the time, but I look back and it was one of the best decisions I made. It was very freeing to let go of that and reinvent myself, and ultimately went back to grad school, and here I sit as a psychologist. So that's sort of like my life story condensed.
Yeah. Paul, it's a really neat story, and so I don't know if I knew that you went to UW-Madison, because I grew up in Madison, but
I did not know that.
I didn't end up going there. I took classes there, but so it's a fun town.
Yeah, you can imagine how big of a university that is, and the Arctic temperatures. I didn't have the executive functioning skills to survive there.
Sure, it is. It's a big school. Did you ever get to see the Statue of Liberty on Lake Mendota?
No.
Did it ever get that cold? Yeah, when the lake freezes over, they'll do ice sculptures on there, and that was always a fun thing to do in winter. Cool. I'm curious about that, because I know you said, like, in high school you knew, like, hey, I'm interested in guitar and music. Going to UW-Madison, was that what you intended? Like, were you going to a music program?
I thought playing guitar was just for fun.
Okay.
So I didn't pick a major. I had no confidence that I could, find a career. I didn't know what I was really interested in.
Sure.
And again, after fighting it off, I just realized, okay, if this is what I want to do, I'm gonna go for it.
Yeah, like you mean with music and
yeah.
Okay. What? So backtracking a little bit, I guess thinking 17, 18, right? What prompted you to go to UW-Madison?
They called it a liberal school, which I'm not sure I even knew what that meant at the time. Other than the fact I knew it was. I didn't want to go to a conservative school, or and I had some other friends going to U of I or Illinois or University of Iowa, and I just wanted to do my own thing, and so it was relatively close to home, and it just seemed to make sense.
Yeah, close enough, far enough away. Parents aren't gonna show up on your door.
Yeah,
and you said you failed out at UW-Madison. Was that like your first experience in failing, or could you think of others?
Yeah, that was a huge failure, but I do often recall I had a moment. I'm trying to think. I must have been middle school. I don't know, 6th, 7th grade. I was at an overnight camp up in northern Wisconsin, and I was learning how to water ski.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like the beginning of the camp term. And I don't know if you've ever been water ski. You get up and you're kind of floating, and you're supposed to hold, and then the boat goes. And I just could not get up. I could not, and so I tried 3 or 4 times, and I'm just and meanwhile there's kids behind me. I'm feeling pressure,
mm-hmm.
and I'm just and then I never tried again after that. And I mean, I don't listen. I'm not going to regret something that happened like when I was, a kid. But looking back in hindsight, it's like I didn't get a chance to overcome that, and so
Sure.
that sort of self-doubt sort of was enabled by not trying again.
Mm-hmm.
So I recognize that was sort of like an experience, and it always sort of haunted me. But yeah, I don't know. When you mentioned like first experiences with failure, that's sort of where
Yeah.
I go to.
Appreciate you sharing that, Paul. And
Yeah.
to anyone who ever listens to this, I'll tell you, I can never get up on water skis either. So I remember trying it once, and then no, I was always a kid, like I would never even want to go tubing. More so, I think, because of like the weeds and Lake Mendota had
Yeah.
I'm like I just never did that. But yeah, that's a really I think a really like particular experience, and I'm curious not to go in too deep onto that, but Paul, like when you were at that point, do you remember what you said or thought to yourself?
No, I mean the narrative that I have again upon reflection is just like I wish maybe some of the camp counselors would have noticed and like encouraged me to try again, or
Yeah.
been a little bit more of support there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I sort of like kind of fell through the cracks, and I just never tried again.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of people that I've talked to about their like particular experiences of failure, that does seem to be a common theme, right? Like I wish somebody at that point, especially as a kid, would have said, hey, let's get up, let's try it again. Or here's, like try to make a small change here and let's see what happens, right? To encourage. But a lot of people who encounter adversity, again, especially as a kid, they are often, okay, well, we don't want to push it too much, so let them do whatever they don't get that encouragement. So again, I appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah,
I think that,
thank you.
and
It's a thin line, because sometimes you got to know when to fold them, but you also don't want to, give up.
For
too
sure.
prematurely. Yeah.
For sure. Well, that's one of the hard parts as a parent too. Right? How far do I push my kiddo, knowing what their capabilities might be, but weighing, whatever could be going on in their day or their frustration tolerance at that point. Like, all right, do I really want to deal with this meltdown right now? Even though I know you can do this, and it, sure that I can see, I could see that.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me started on parenting just yet. I mean, talk about feeling like a failure, and I suspect it's a common experience just because parenting is just the hardest thing in the world.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, that, I mean, and so, Ashley, my wife, is also a psychologist. And as we were talking about like the planning for the podcast and planning for the blog and everything, I think it was a particularly rough week. And we were just like, okay, so we could just like toss all of our thoughts into this because, kind of feeling, yeah, I think that is maybe I don't know if it's universal, but every parent I've ever spoken to can probably hands and toes or fingers and toes combined tell stories about here's how I messed this up, here's how I failed at this, or here's how my kid called me a failure. And then it's like, oh man. But it's so hard. It is. And I think Paul, it gets back to like why I want to talk about this, because we all go through it.
Yeah.
And if anyone listens to the last interview, we're talking about, I think it was a 5K run, right? Or at a race. We all can, like, we're just reminiscing on like, hey, here we are talking about the race, talking about like, oh, we're going to crush it, do this. And, a lot of us, if we look back on it, have in the back of our minds, like, okay, if this doesn't go well, or if I miss a stroke, or if I mess up, if I'm not as fast as I want to be at this point, what's going to happen there? right? And like the worries that are all there, but no one's talking about that, right? We're not at like the start line, be like, oh, what do you think?
Yeah.
Instead, there's something else that comes out. Which I guess, I was thinking about that, and Paul, knowing that, again, as a musician, right? Has there ever been a time where you might have had that worry, had that concern that, okay, maybe I'm playing or doing a concert or a show, and if I mess up, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying performing. I mean, I think it just takes a lot of repetitions on stage just to kind of feel comfortable with making mistakes. Shoot, I mean, I could go in so many directions in terms of failing, within the realm of music, but I do like to, when someone's playing and they're sort of in the zone and they make a mistake, it's like you can't control Z, you can't reverse and just do it. It's like in the past. I mean, we're talking about like a micro moment, like, and then if you get hung up and if you're perseverating on that past moment, you're gonna start tripping over yourself.
Sure.
So it's like at a certain point you got to learn to literally just let it go and just and be okay with it and not attach any like psychological charge or just get hung up about it. And in some sense, making mistakes, if you want to look at like the improvisational world, whether it's like jazz or jam bands, and like they capitalize on mistakes where something happens and then they're like, oh, let's work on that or let's follow that somewhere else.
So mistakes are almost they're accepted and they're built upon. Like
sometimes,
yeah.
But if I zoom out for a little bit as a musician, like I don't know when I officially adopted the idea, but like it's like if you listen back to yourself as a musician, it's excruciating because you hear all your mistakes.
Sure.
And I'm sure we talked about this, like just having a podcast and having to listen back to ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone really enjoys listening back to themselves in whatever form. But nonetheless, like you can hear so many mistakes, and at a certain point, I learned like just let all that go. It's just not, unless you're like purposely studying your craft or your skills and trying to like actually like work on your techniques and that's one thing. But like to get hung up and get down on yourself, it's just there's just too much to get down on that. Like it's just it's sort of like it's a fool's errand.
Sure. Paul, that resonates a lot with me because I row, that's my sport and that's what I put a lot of effort and energy into. And for me, we always talk about the perfect piece. Like, oh man, that was like a perfect race where your form and your power and your strength are all like combining in the right way. We don't get out there and we're like, man, you know what? Whatever mistakes you make, that's okay. Right? Yeah, so it's really cool to hear that, like in other areas, like you said, in music and a jam band and jazz, right? That there is this like, hey, let's follow that. Let's see what happens there.
Maybe because of the Super Bowl was last, but I think a lot about coaches and how you have some coaches like Bobby Knight that would just put the fear of God in his players. And I don't know. I feel like lately you see more coaches that are way more in tune psychologically and emotionally with their players that are more encouraging. Like when players make mistakes.
Sure.
So, but at the same time, like again, Bobby Knight, he's gone on to have tremendous success, but it's hard to know like that level of like criticism and fear. Like it's just not. I don't know. I question it. Like it's utility.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder, and we're going to digress quite a bit here, but to your water skiing experience there, right? And would you say your understanding of failure was where you are today in life is the same as back then?
Yeah, I mean, much more experience under my belt, and I'd like to think I have a little bit of wisdom, but I've been able to just deconstruct the concept a little bit more. Where these are all just self-imposed expectations.
Sure.
And you could look at animals or infants. Like, are they successful or are they failures? Like, it's a construct that we have that it's sort of our merit-based society, which is I don't know, it gets a little bit hairy, and so our culture really just weighs heavily on the success, and that's appealing to other people. But it's like for every success, there's got to be a failure. So it's like
Sure.
You can't have one without the other. So I don't know. I don't want to say I've been comfortable with it, but I guess I'm just okay with it, or I try not to get hung up on things too much, and I've learned to just let things go. And I mean, of course, there's things where I was like, I get down about it, or I wish I wouldn't have done that, but they're fleeting.
Sure. You had said that, especially like in learning guitar, just being able to let go so you don't kind of get caught up and tripped up as you move forward with the mistakes. So, excuse me. I guess that, if could we maybe jump into your experiences as a musician and talk more about that, Paul?
Well, I let me actually relate it to something I learned, I think, during my advanced practicum.
Okay.
And I can jump back
Sure.
about my music stuff. But I distinctly recall, this is my advanced practicum, so it was a private practice, and so it was my first real, bona fide private practice experience, one-on-one, no other supervisors around, just me and another adult. And I can't remember, I must have been working with this person for a couple weeks, and you go through grad school and you learn so much, and you're like, do this, do that, don't do that, and there's so much that goes through our head.
Yeah.
Of what we're supposed to do, obviously, manual, and so at a certain point, I realized if I'm going to do this, if I want to be myself and be more genuine, I have to be okay taking a little bit of risk and making mistakes. Not I'm saying calculated risk or for example, okay, maybe I said something stupid, or maybe it didn't come out of my mouth the right way, or maybe I sound like rubbish, but I allowed myself to make mistakes and also say things that maybe I wanted to say but wasn't sure, and I'm just just go with it sometimes. And that was a kind of an interesting moment where I gave myself permission to make mistakes, and it sort of freed me up to just talk and
To be real.
And just have a conversation and listen to people.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much noise that can go on that interferes with actual work, and trying to listen to people and so I can easily get tripped up over evaluating things.
Sure.
And so the same thing happens when performing or on stage. You just got to get out of your own way sometimes. It's not easy getting into the zone all the time, and I don't want to pretend that happens much, but it is being in that flow state sort of is my, I guess, where I'm shooting for, to kind of just feel like I'm there, but not getting, not getting hung up on things, and just letting things go and come out, and not worrying about every word that comes out of my mouth, or every note that comes out of my guitar.
Sure.
So it is freeing in a big sense, but there's got to be. I try to have some restraints and not get too carried away, and
still got to have some boundaries. And
I still we still work on our technique and.
Yeah. Well, I'm making a note of that, when you said flow state and like getting out of your own way. I definitely want to come back to that because I'd be curious what that looks like for you and how, how you get into that. Let's come back to that and
Sure.
Yeah. Well, talk about your music.
I mean, there's a lot of different dimensions or kind of perspectives that I experience it. One is simply just a fun activity to connect with other people, to actually be active with other people. And then if you really dig deeper, you're communicating on stage with people. It's like you're harmonizing, working with people to kind of co-create. So just like that task level, it's really fun. The flow state, like I think cannot exist without a lot of hard work and focus, concentration, like studying essentially.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, you're just sort of like going on like muscle memory and just sort of. I feel the best when I've done my work and then I can let go and have fun.
Sure.
Right? I guess like work and fun, to me, they go hand in hand. You can't have fun without actual hard work. And when I say fun, I mean like feeling good about the music that I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not easy because it takes parents and we have full-time jobs, so it's hard to find that concentration and the energy to study. In my 20s I had it, and so I would play for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and so that was great. So I felt like I achieved like a fair amount of success according to my own expectations as a musician. Like I play things, I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe I can recreate this Jimmy Page solo. I'm like, what? That was. So for me, like I felt good about that, and that was just my own intrinsic motivation. So that felt great. But when you bring in the outside world, it's like, I wasn't taught how to play with other people, and so it took me many years to learn how to like play in a band or just know where my space is within others in musical. And so I a lot of failures there, but keep trying to hone in on what I need to correct and trying to like just make tweaks here and there, and ultimately you just keep trying, and the more reps I think it just get better with time. Okay, so even like you have the talent and the skills, but the reality is like musicians don't get paid or barely get paid. You play, early career musicians, they play, at bars and venues late at night, and sometimes there's 2 people there, sometimes there's 100 or more, and so it's like a lot of extremes. You're hauling around so much heavy gear, and it's just, and you're out late, and so it's just not it wasn't a healthy lifestyle for me, and I got burnt out essentially, and I didn't want to. I mean, I wanted to like have a family and kind of just have a stable life, and I didn't want to be like a 40, 50-year-old crusty musician. No offense to anyone, but like I wanted to have stability in my life, and I didn't want to have to keep chasing after that. And so, all that sort of coalesced in my early to mid 30s, and I still was holding on to it, but like I just didn't have it in me to play. Like, and there were times where I just didn't feel like playing, and it was not fun. And I tried to. I struggled there for a period of time. I don't remember how long, but ultimately I was like, you know what, this just isn't working. Maybe I just need to let it go, because it was such a huge part of my identity.
Sure.
I mean, I invested pretty much everything I had in my 20s into that, in almost to the sort of So I overinvested, and then I'm like, okay, well, what do I do now? Ultimately, I realized it just wasn't happening. I was at a point where, you get only so many chances to reinvent yourself in life, I think, or, generally speaking. And I was like, you know what? Like, I just cannot keep pushing this boulder up the mountain. And so at a certain point, I just like, okay, I give up. Like, I think it was the hardest part was getting there, but once I got there,
To that
again,
that
it was
decision.
so freeing that like it was still scary because I didn't have the next thing, but that came shortly thereafter when I was like, oh, what was on my bucket list, or what did I always want to do if I had the magic wand?
Had you not said close, I don't want to say close the door, but had you not made that decision of this isn't working, right? You don't think that you would have gone into psychology?
Yeah, I mean, there was a path where I probably would have taken some random job somewhere, as whether it's in the corporate world or as kind of like an operation manager for a website. So I could have just taken sort of a generic job like that, but like I didn't want that either. So it was actually through therapy, when I was in therapy, that I was just racking my brain, like I really want to specialize in something, and it occurred to me, like in therapy, like I was fascinated with the process and like how it works, and what's the magic all about, and ultimately there is no magic, but like I wanted to deconstruct it.
Don't say that here, Paul, please.
I should peel the curtain back to
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's sort of the bridge that got me into going to grad school, and it was
Yeah.
I mean, I joke that like I could be in my, we could be in our 90s and just sitting in a chair and we could still work. So it's kind
Sure.
of, But anyway, I was just mystified by it and really wanted to learn about it. And so I tapped into that curiosity and desire. I mean, it was also something I always wanted to do as a, younger self, but, it was always sort of like a pipe dream.
Yeah.
And so and I'm like, all right, let's just dive into it. And again, I'm fortunate enough to have the support to, with my family to help me get through it. Just as a side note, the other pipe dream my other dream thing, I would love to have been, even though I love guitar, like would love to have been like a classical pianist or
Sure.
like a jazz pianist. But I could never, my brain just can't work. And
Yeah.
I don't have two brains to do that.
Yeah, is that what held you back? Like, did you ever try?
No, I
Okay.
realized that was not attainable, and I didn't get hung up on it. But like, kind of fun to think like, oh, I wish I
Yeah.
had done that.
Well, and you said you at least at the onset you were a self-taught guitar player, and clearly you would have the ability to learn and to to develop skills. But did you find anything else different or difficult there?
With piano?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I know how to play, but I sort of am just a hack at it. Like so.
Okay.
But I know, like I'm okay with it though. I didn't have it in me to invest so much time and effort to retrain my fingers.
Sure.
But on another level here, like my whole time playing guitar, it's like, and I didn't realize this up until the past couple of years, that I didn't have, as I mentioned about University of Wisconsin, I didn't have the executive functioning skills to know how to really advance as a guitarist, because you really do have to study and focus and dedicate. And I mean, I did play a lot. I mean, I put in the time, but I feel like a lot of the time was used inefficiently. And where it takes discipline to you got to practice what you want to call it, scales, or just exercise, not almost as if you're going to the gym and doing your reps and doing your things every single day. At a certain point, I did have that, but like I just kind of fumbled my way through it, and I don't regret it, but I wish. I in hindsight, I just know that my not great executive functioning skills sort of held me back.
Sure. And you did say a lot of being able to get into that flow state is about the practice that it takes to actually get there. Right. So I can see where, that would be difficult. Yeah. Like if you're having trouble organizing or keeping yourself kind of tasked to practice it, because
there's
skills.
So much involved with like getting organized, like memorization, finger agility. Like, there's just so much involved, and ultimately it comes down to muscle memory.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you let go, your muscles, your fingers,
Sure.
and it just comes out. You have to trust that you've done the practice ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that's a big struggle to really have the discipline.
Yeah. Well, you say that, and I played tenor sax in high school.
Okay, so you probably
And-
understand it.
Yeah, some of it. I don't think I was ever if anyone from my high school is listening or my old band director, I don't think I was ever as dedicated, Paul, as you have been to music. Loved it, but I remember sitting in my band director's office or in one of the practice rooms, right? Like just busting out scales and like, okay, we're going to start at C, go to G, go to A, go to E, and like jumping up and down and like I could do it when I practiced it enough. Now, like I still have my saxophone up in my living room, and my kids like to like take the reeds out. They'll be like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I haven't played it in years, but I don't think I could do that. I don't think I would be able to be at the same level. Granted, it's been decades, but I think to your
But
point,
it's like riding a bike. Like if you did dust it off and practice for maybe a week or two here and there, some of it would come back to you. I do
Sure.
believe
sure.
that's that muscle memory again.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to something that you said, and like you were thinking about recognizing, like, hey, music isn't really working out for you. Paul, could you tell me more about like maybe some of the thoughts or your experiences, whether it's even like in your body, right, physiologically, emotionally, like what that time was like for you?
It was pretty scary, to be honest. Like I didn't. Again, I wasn't. I didn't realize that I could. It didn't occur to me to not. It didn't occur to me to let it go, to retire. So I didn't really, but at the same time, I didn't see a path forward. So I was really stuck. And
Sure.
I don't know how this is relevant, but at a certain point, towards the end of that tale, I remember, like I felt like I was going through like a deconstructionist period where I even let go of like chord structures and tempo and just really just at a time where I was just playing around with noises and sounds.
Sure.
Really just trying to like free everything up. And that was fun, but didn't really. There's no utility in that. But it was kind of an interesting process I had to go to go from songs have structure to this unformed cacophony, and I think thereafter I was like, okay, I can't put this Humpty Dumpty back together.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it was scary. It was not fun. I don't know if I felt it in my body, but I'd have my setup, my gear, my guitars, and I just have no inclination to do it. And just out of sheer, one could say it was a risk to kind of let it go. It just felt like a relief. Like I just banging my head against the wall.
Yeah. In trying to deconstruct it, do you think, I don't want to lead you on, right, or lead you in any direction here, but
It's okay.
do you think that you were maybe trying to find something through that?
I do think that, yeah.
Like a gestalt, like looking at the separate parts there and seeing what's all in there?
Well, yeah, and I do think I do that, like, just in my normal thinking, just trying to boil things down to their, what are the essence of things.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like it's waxing poetic about it, but like that was sort of the sort of the period that I went through, before I had the energy to make that change, to move into a different state, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Now, like, I'm curious, with the people you work with, right? Do you notice a similar process with other people, right? Maybe as they're trying to go through change, like they deconstruct.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What I noticed more, actually, because it's a little bit more foreign to me, are people who are so resistant to failing.
Sure.
that creates tension and stress for themselves.
Yeah.
And again, in hindsight, I've learned that it's okay. Like, what's going to happen if you fail? Like, sometimes there's just situations where it's okay. Like, there's no consequences in the real world if you fail at something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, people are coming in with more significant situations,
Sure.
And more at stake. But I do like, to understand like that. Why is that so meaningful for that person?
Yeah.
And why are they holding on to that construct? And there's nothing wrong with it, but in terms of like getting underneath it and deconstructing it again,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of the angle I take.
Yeah. Where do you think that process for you came from? Like deconstructing things? 'Cause it seems like you did it naturally almost.
Yeah, I guess I do. We were talking about the Rorschach before too. And
Yeah.
I distinctly remember because there was just so much. There's so much info, and it's all. I felt like it was very disorganized, and I had to again. I guess if we're going on this deconstructionist thing, I had to like take all the pieces and like just look at them and kind of build the puzzle back together. And I think that helps me internalize that concept or that the Rorschach or
Sure.
because other than that, I'm trying to like before like the Rorschach was just this external thing and these weird names about things that it didn't mean anything to me, but like
Yeah.
I know it's valuable, so I do think again coming back to like executive functions. I hate to, I'm not just throwing that out because we're psychologists, but I do see that as a thread that there's a lot of disorganized things, and when you need to like make sense, like you got to catalog this stuff and like understand how all the pieces fit together.
Sure.
And so I think that's maybe where that comes from. Like it's just so unsettling for me when things are disorganized. And I'm not talking about like obsessive, but like I lean more towards creating order in a situation versus
Sure.
some. I tend to think people. I don't know how much I believe this, but I'm sure you see some people. They gravitate towards chaos a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I that makes a lot of sense for anyone who is not in therapy or a therapist or a psychologist or anything. I'll give this. It's a form of therapy or a therapeutic approach and theory. IFS. The internal family systems. Yeah. And Paul, some of what you're talking about there it almost seems like getting to understand the parts and how they all kind of fit together, right? And like not to diminish the role of any one part. So I'm thinking, and this is subjective or implicit, but I'm my wife and I we play around with songs, and chords on the piano, and I never learned chords. Like even though I learned how to play the piano, I never learned to just play chords and yada yada. So I've been playing Numb from Linkin Park. I don't know if you remember, like 2001, 2002. In any case, it playing the chords of the music, like you can take out individual notes and you still kind of have the whole, you get how it's supposed to sound.
Yeah.
But when you add in the full chord, if you go, whether it's 3 notes or an octave worth, whatever, there's so much more to it. Right. And then you start to hear what else is there. And if you look at that individual piece, right, then you can make sense of, oh, this is okay. I get why this is here now. That if you never went through that, you would not know. But I think the analogy here is playing piano. Obviously, you have to use 5, 10 fingers, whatever. That's difficult. It takes a lot to okay, where is G sharp? Now I got to make my hand do that, and then I got to move. Let's go up to now the E. And so you got to figure that all out. And like the part to whole component there, I think is really interesting, right? And Paul, as you are breaking this down, because it seems like that was a growth process, even though like you were breaking something down to understand it, but it was part of you growing to this point of making a decision of what you wanted to do. It sounds like you did not have that in your mind, like I'm going to break this down to look at the parts in order to make a decision, but that was just part of what led to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that well versed with IFS, but I know there's like a cast of characters more or less.
Yep.
And
that's a fun way of putting it.
Yeah, and they all there's relationships amongst all of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you were talking about all the notes, there's relationships between every single note. Yeah, we're talking about all these different levels of me playing music, and and again the parallels between that and therapy or psychology, and another one I come to is just the expressive nature of things, like getting stuff out.
Sure.
And I mean that's a whole thing in and of itself. And then the attention receiving process, that's a whole separate, deeper level. Like, we play because we want to connect. I shouldn't say we. I play because I like that feeling of playing, but I wouldn't, I'm not going to. There's an element of just getting that validation, that feedback from the audience or friends and family, things like that. And so that's more of an emotional piece where you kind of, not going to lie, you kind of seek that validation.
Yeah. I would imagine that makes it hard then when you're like going a completely different direction with my life, right? The way that people knew you, how they understood you. Paul he's in this band. Paul is a professional guitar player. Paul does, and like that's our understanding of Paul. I would imagine that could be difficult to then, hey, this is not what I'm doing anymore.
Well, it's interesting because I think people's, my closer friends and family, like they knew me with the inverse.
Okay.
And didn't know as much about my musical identity as much, just because that was more of like a solitary thing when you're practicing long hours. And,
sure.
So it felt different where which is called my musical personality, felt a little bit more foreign. I felt that part of me was a little bit more foreign to those. So there was a little bit of a divide there.
But I want to bring it back to, Paul, like, because you spent 15 years, right, as a musician, and like that's not a small amount of time, right? To becoming disillusioned, I guess, could you speak to some of those pieces, like your experience and your process through that, right? Like, how did you even become aware? I'm feeling disillusioned with this, or I am disillusioned with the lifestyle.
I just wasn't happy, and I just got tired of feeling that way. And I think I just pursued all the other options, and a lot of the. Well, what more specifically, what happened is like I sort of co-created a band with some other guys, and we had a good time and played some gigs, nothing notable, so to speak, and then I sort of helped basically produce an album in a studio, thinking that was going to be our launch board into bona fide like touring band, like
sure,
marketing and all that stuff. But ultimately the band fell apart, and I was like, left to start over. And it's kind of like you go through a breakup, and you're just like, oh my god, I don't want to have to start dating from scratch again, and like I just didn't have that in me, and all of the external hard work just did not. It just wasn't equating for me. I mean, I know you keep going back to like that moment or like what was going through, but like that's sort of like what ended up. I think it's. I've seen other bands where they make an album thinking that's going to save them.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, it just didn't pan out. I'm still proud of it, but it didn't achieve any material success whatsoever. Maybe I get $12 a year in royalties.
That's pretty neat though. That's pretty neat. By the time I knew you we were in our respective programs, but I had no idea, right, that you had those experiences, and just like, which are, I think, really cool. And it's awesome to hear about this, even though it didn't work out and you went through that, but it sounds like you have turned that into, at some level, some motivation and some of the pieces that you have today.
I feel great where my life is today, and obviously it worked out, but I couldn't be here if I didn't let go of that.
Yeah.
And, I don't regret it one bit, though. I mean, that's a big point. Like, I took a huge risk playing music. And
sure.
It's a grueling lifestyle, and I realized I just couldn't cut it.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about, like, when you were in middle school up north in Wisconsin and water skiing, kind of having a wish, I'll say it this way, that's not exactly the way that you said it, but having a wish that somebody would have said, hey, get back up, try it again, right? Let's see what you can do. I mean, do you ever think back and wish for the same at that point? Like when you were going through, when you had made that decision.
Music?
Yeah.
So to sort of ground it in psychological theory, we're talking about mirroring in a sense.
Sure.
Self-psychology, like having someone sort of reflect and encourage you and support you and things like
mm-hmm.
that. I didn't have that in that water skiing example, but I mentioned, like, I had a mentor, or my guitar teacher became my mentor, mm-hmm. and that was the secret ingredient for me to really want to succeed or want to, like, get better because of that relationship.
Sure.
And I think that was missing. I didn't have someone else like that in my later 20s when I was in that struggling period
mm-hmm.
as a electric guitarist, so to speak.
Sure.
So I mean, who knows? If I had someone that could have, like, pointed out what I needed to do or helped me kind of like, who knows? Maybe things would have been different.
Yeah, and I ask that not to bring up, like, if we could change the past or anything, because as you share this, like, Paul, having gotten to know you, like, I'm glad that you became who you are, because now we get to know each other in this way. And I do wonder, was there a reason why at that point there wasn't someone like that in your life?
Oh, that's a good question.
I like to tell my patients I get one good question a day, right?
I think I just wasn't open to it. I think I was probably guarded and just mm-hmm. not in a good headspace to be open or seek out someone. So I didn't really broadcast that.
Sure.
I mean, I look at, like, fantasize about, like, the guitar gods that I love, and look at see what they're doing. But, like, that's sort of a fantasy. So I didn't really have any, like, successful working musicians, maybe a generation older than me, that could have, like, shown me the horizon a little bit more to prepare for it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Like, the more as I think about this, like, again, I don't want to sound like pompous or anything, but, like, I as it relates to confidence, like, I feel like I was able to work towards it to develop some degree of confidence as a musician, at least. Again, being self-taught and having, like, music is a structured language.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own way of thinking about music, and then you had to, like, relearn the language to be able to play with other people.
Sure.
And I fumbled so much, but then, you have certain, like, little nuggets of, like, amazing musical experience, and that keeps you going forward. And then at a certain point, you start like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. This feels good. It's right. And so, pardon me for bringing in another, psychological term, but, when we learned about degrees of confidence and stats.
Sure.
How usually you go for, like, 95% confidence. Like, That's basically saying if you do something 95 times, it's likely that something's going to happen the way it's supposed to. Those 5% are going to be like off. But the way I translate it, and this is sort of my own nuanced or just disorganized way of thinking about it, is like if I practice, let's say this sequence of chords, or this song, if I practice this song 100 times, how many times does it have to be good? You know, I know that's arbitrary, but how many times does it have to be good for me to feel confident that I know what I'm doing?
Okay.
So it's like that. That's how I sort of calculated to translate into like, I can trust that my fingers know what they're doing because I've done it so many times, and I played the sequence properly so many times that now I feel good and confident about it. So again, I'm breaking it down. I'm trying to understand what is confidence, and I use that a lot in therapy. Just, you know, some people are born with it. I don't. That's not me at all. And you
have to build it up, practice it, and
and not for like nothing. I mean, you know, again, we're all born into this world, and like babies are not confident or not confident. It's just like we are, and so so I draw upon those experiences when I have patients struggling with confidence or being unsure about things. Again, I don't want to pretend like I have all the answers or am uber confident, which you know, a lot of times I'm not, but at least in that musical realm, I can say I had that.
Sure.
It happens sometimes.
Well, I think that's really powerful, right? Because music is universal to all cultures. Music is universal, even animals, you know, communicate through music at some level. But I think the message that can be conveyed just by a series of notes being played, you know, at the right frequencies is huge. In undergrad, I wanted to study psychologically the experience of music, right? Like so I'm going to like throw out some notes here. An F, B flat, and C if played on the piano all together, like kind of, you know, somewhat morose, I think.
You're talking about how those vibrations, literally, air vibrations, get in here and affect us in some way.
Yeah, and we have an affectual experience because of how that is, and I think that's just it's so there's something so human about that, like a very deep experience that we all can, you know, relate to at some level. And I guess where I'm going with this, Paul, is like, you know, how you think about that in therapy, I would imagine brings a lot of depth to the work that you're doing, right? That experience that you had here, it sounds like you have, whether taken it apart or looking at it as a whole, I can see where that is being, you know, where you're utilizing that in your work as a psychologist.
Yeah.
Which I think is huge. And I don't know if, you know, I'm going to point this out, but like, you know, you said, right, at your late 20s when you were going through the deconstruction phase and, you know, you weren't sure what you wanted to do there with music. You didn't have a mentor. You didn't, at that point, like, you weren't talking with people about, hey, what do I do? Where do I go with this?
Well, but let me actually just correct that. It was through when I was working with this therapist.
Okay.
He wasn't a mentor, but that relationship sort of was a catalyst in a way to allow me to think sort of outside the box and something. It was an experience that allowed me to tap into something that I wanted to understand.
Yeah.
The process of therapy, that is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and
so again, he wasn't a mentor, but you know, quasi mentor, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
Inspiration or catalyst.
Well, and what you've explained, it seems like you're doing a lot of that in the work today, offering different perspectives, helping people to see, well, you see it as A, let's look at it as R or D or, you know, whatever other number or letter we could assign to it, which I think is really cool. If there was, you know, Paul, a couple of things or one thing that you were like, you know what, this really helped me through that period of time, right, as you were transitioning from music to finding out the next thing to do, like what helped you? What was good in that?
Well, having the support of my family and also being in therapy, I mean, it really helped me kind of look outside the box and do some self-exploration. And
Sure.
kind of help figure some of the stuff out. Because I was, operating quite independently and just needed some outside input.
Yeah. Yeah, you had said that earlier, right? Like you were independent, and that was a barrier to seeing something different.
Yeah.
I kept thinking about that, like this seeing it or being independent. I think which is something like, I worked a lot with teens and it's like I just want to be, and I think for my own teenagers, like I want to be independent. I want to do things on my own, right? Striving for autonomy and then right here we are as adults. Like it's almost like being too independent is not a great thing. Like yeah, and I think it's so I'm so glad at that point that you had someone like a therapist to talk to and to help to help at least provide another perspective to things, because that's powerful.
I will also say though that the concept or the utility of perseverance is way more salient as a parent than in any of my other endeavors. Like,
sure.
Because there's no other option. You have to keep trying.
Yeah. There. That's right. I mean, there is no. I can't go a different direction with this.
Yeah, and there's times where it's hard, and like in the past, like you just quit this job, or I can change careers, or just you can change your mind or whatever. You can't do that, and so
sure,
it forces you to face whatever you need to face and just muscle through.
Well, so what do you do with that then? All right, you recognize I need to face this, and I have to be here. Then what?
I usually have to distance myself for a little bit and then come back and then kind of lean in again.
Sure.
And just kind of just accept whatever the situation is. And
things aren't the way that I want it to be, but I'm still here, and this is what I have.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, I think we were talking, there's 1,000 opportunities throughout the day to be a bad parent.
Sure.
We can just throw out the idea of managing screens for kids. I'm sure most parents struggle with this. And
I got my Switch right in the background right there. Yeah.
My wife's a psychologist, and we both still struggle with managing the screen time. And I'm just using it as more of a lighter example, but we just got to keep trying and try new strategies until it works. But it's the resilience just comes in just by not having another choice, really. Sure. I mean, I have another choice, but that's inconceivable to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like in recognizing that you move yourself towards flexibility, right? And I think that's the word that came to mind.
Yeah.
Is like you're not going to stay stuck on this. I can be flexible enough to do that.
Yeah.
And I can see, as a teenager, right, as a young adult, even in mid-20s, super hard to do. I'll use a parenting example. I really don't want to eat pizza and chicken fingers again for dinner. But you know what? I guess I will, because it works, at least for right now.
Sometimes you just gotta wave the white flag, or just give in and
get the tendies, get the nuggies, and yeah.
It's hard. We've talked about it before, but working parents and it's a lot to juggle. And
sure.
So if those snacks are the thing you have to compromise on, and I guess in the big scheme of things, it's really not.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to be flexible and let that go.
Yeah. Well, and maybe in a minute, if you could, Paul, what helps you to be flexible? What helps there?
I think I just know that thoughts can come and go, and they're just thoughts, and that sometimes there's going to be other perspectives, or Well, okay, more specifically, like, if I'm making a big decision about something and, I have a process of narrowing down options and then I come to a conclusion, but maybe it's still not right. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try it from a different angle. Trusting or having the confidence that it'll unfold and present itself in a way.
Sure. Well, so it sounds like having trust that what you put out there will manifest, that it will be okay.
Yeah. It's still scary, though.
Sure. Sure.
Again, coming out of this podcast, like,
yeah.
Oh, shoot, what am I getting into?
I'm glad that you took that risk, Paul. Because
yes, but there's it's a spectrum of like sometimes you can be reckless with your risks. Sometimes, but sometimes it's okay to again take calculated risks.
Mm-hmm.
Again, some of those are some of those magical moments for me playing guitar. It's where I just imagine like a gymnast like going up for the jumping on the springboard and
mm-hmm.
just had thrown themselves up in the air and spinning in 1,000 different directions. It's sometimes like what I do with my hands, just like throw a hope at it, I land.
Sure.
And sometimes it's like, wow, I can't believe that just happened.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel like I can take credit for that, but it just happened.
Paul, as kind of to get meta about this, it sounds like what the basis for being able to do that is what you put into it, which is you practice to then be able to have some faith. I'm going to give it a try and see what happens, and then do it. To have trust then in yourself.
Yeah,
and I think that's a really powerful message, because it's easy, especially in the face of having failed at something, to not trust yourself, which then puts up a blinder or even a cardboard box right over your head of what you have actually done to help yourself get as far as you've gotten. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think if we were to boil it down, it's sort of the opposites of that first experience with water skiing, where I didn't overcome it, versus the guitar, where I kept trying and kept trying and still failed and kept trying and ultimately I got it. Forget the fact that I let it go, but like I kept trying is the point.
Yeah.
Whereas with the water skis, I just gave up.
Yep. Looking at that, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is what you've tried and what you've done doesn't just go away all of a sudden, even if it doesn't work out. It's all still there. It was your job in that moment to keep trying and to keep going with it.
Again, I'm mindful that I had a lot of support to be able to take some risks.
Sure.
Whereas I can imagine most people are more risk averse or just don't have those opportunities. And so I'm lucky in that sense, right? I feel gratitude about that.
But I think what you're saying here is, and framing up, is that by having a support structure, by having people you can lean in on when those times come up where like, hey, this didn't go so well, that's super helpful. I know like during the pandemic, we became a more disconnected sort of society, more connected electronically, but like disconnected just in personal interactions. And I think that there had been a trend of that even before the pandemic. The pandemic just kind of made it more in our face. And I think we have, at some levels, gotten back a little bit to more, connections, but still very disconnected.
Right. I think that to me that translates into just having a support system.
Yeah.
And I learned the hard way, where again, like it took me many years to realize how vital that was. Because when you do fail, you're going to need that safety net.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's just utterly crucial. And I often use that like when I'm doing my intakes or getting to know someone for the first time. That's an important component that I like to explore when meeting someone.
Sure.
My clients, that is.
Yeah. I am glad you shared that, because I think, again, it is kind of highlighting how your experiences have helped you kind of understand what you're doing today and informed your process today. Paul, I want to switch gears a little bit because we're going to have to wrap up for today. Let me ask you a question, okay? I guess I have two questions for you, but the first one is the one that I'm going to ask everyone that I ever interview.
Go for it.
If you had to pick a color, right? If you had thinking about failure, if you had to pick a color, what color would it be?
I don't know. I just see green for some reason.
Okay.
Not
Any hue to it, or like
just solid green.
solid? Okay, like Crayola green.
Well, I'm looking at a plant right here and an image on my wall that, I don't know, just speaks to me.
Sure.
I mean, I could imbue some artistic connotations to it, like, green relates to envy, and, when someone fails, they kind of like, they're envious of whoever succeeds, or so I think that's where I go with that.
Sure.
Real quick, for example, like when I see amazing guitarists, it's sometimes hard to watch, because I know, like, sure, if I would have put in another decade of grueling work, I maybe could have gotten there, but like, to think that other people, it's just like, it's amazing, and don't get me wrong, it's like, I love seeing those rock stars, but it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Because, so I don't feel that envy a lot, but maybe that's just what came up.
Thank you for sharing that. It makes sense. It's been a part of your life for so long, and to see that, and yeah, I can get that. Now, I'm also curious, Paul, did you ever go back and try water skiing again?
No, I have not, actually.
Oh, okay.
Sounds like I should, maybe, to kind of...
Well, if you do, let's get you back on and see what happens. And
we could live stream the event. How about that?
Hey, there we go. Perfect.
It'll make me whole.
Perfect. Hey, that works for me. Well, Paul, what are some ways, if for anyone listening, if they ever want to get in touch with you or find out more about your practice, how can they do that?
All right, so I'm a psychologist. I work mainly with adults outside Chicago. I'm in a suburb called Northbrook, and I see people in person, and I can see people online. I'm a member of SciPac, so it means I can see people in pretty much every state with a few exceptions. Mm-hmm. My practice is called Bedrock Psychology Group, bedrockpsychologygroup.com.
Awesome. Paul, I appreciate you sharing everything and going in depth and being a part of this.
My pleasure. It was nice to share.